Alright, so welcome to Kevin McCain Studios and Idaho Art Classes. We're going to be doing some painting today. We're going to be working in watercolor. Thought I got this light enough to work on, but I'm starting to think maybe I didn't. So, in terms of the brushes we're using, I've got a 3/4 inch flat brush. I've got a 1 inch flat brush. Again, I don't think these are made anymore. This is a Winsor & Newton 295, 296, something like that. It's been rubbed off. This is over 25 years old. A 1 inch Cotman is a good substitute. These are Cotmans. They'll last you 20 years. This is probably 15 years or maybe even 20 years old itself. But they still make the Cotmans. They're a really good brush. This one's a little loose. If you ever have a brush that's loose like this, try to actually pull that thing all the way off, put a little super glue on it, snap it back on, it will never come back off again. So that just means it didn't get glued on very well in the factory, or it's been left in water. Like I can see there's a crack here, a split there, which means this was probably left in water. And what happens is the wood swells, it opens this up. But anyways, you can still glue it back on, not a big problem. You don't want to leave these in water. This you don't see split, which means, yeah, if you ever forget this thing in water too long, it'll swell. Wood swells when it's wet, and it'll split the paint, and it'll ruin the ferrule. Again, this is another one of these Winsor & Newton. Oh, it's a 239. I can actually read this one. This is a number 10 round. This is a number 10 round. This is like an 8 or a 5 round or something like that. Yeah, it's number 8. And again, this is just a 3/4 inch. The Royale, I mean, this is a really cheap brush as far as that goes. So I don't know if I'm going to actually use this one. I might put this one aside. Or we might just grab our little brush pack here and check inside what we've got. These are kind of nice. You can keep a lot of different types of brushes in here. This is a 1/2 inch. Now this is I don't even remember what this is, but I know it's a more decent brush than that 3/4. So I'll take the 1/2 inch and I'll put this 3/4 away because again, it's not that great a brush. So I'll put that away and we'll take this. Oh, I might need a smaller brush. This is a number 6 round. I don't think I'll need anything much smaller than that. But if I do, I've got number 3s and number 1s. I just don't use them very often, so I don't even keep them in here. The rounds, if you have a good round, it'll come to a nice tip. So if I dip this in water, the earmark of a good brush is that it'll keep a nice good tip on there, and it does. This isn't near as nice, but it's not bad either. You look up there, again, pretty nice tip. So that's nice. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to paint a landscape painting today. This is just a picture I took. I've got 2 versions, so I can see this is actually a little overexposed. This is actually properly exposed. So this is a little blown out, and the reason I wanted to do that is because it clarifies the shapes. We want to use as simple shapes as possible. When people start doing stuff in watercolor, they start trying to draw every last little tree in there, and that's not a good idea. It just always looks weird when you do it like that. We have quite a dramatic sky. We're going to deal with some of that sky. But anyways, we've done mostly still life, so we want to break outside of still life and do something that's got another genre, landscape. And I'll do some portraiture too at some point, but this is like the next level up, next step up. It's a different challenge with landscape. What we want to look for, and I'm actually these are snapped at just, I mean, those clouds are really moving, and we can tell that this is very different than this. So these clouds are really moving quick. Like this right here is this cloud. And these were only a few minutes apart, and you can see the cloud's already gone almost in this picture right here. But when we're dealing with, we really have to deal with the laws of depth when we're dealing with landscape. You can use what's called atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective, in my as far as I'm concerned, is basically just the basic laws of creating depth. How do we create depth? Well, we want the biggest things in the foreground. So if we look at these trees, the trees are bigger here, and they get smaller as they go back. Big, medium, small. And what happens with the mountains, or the foothills of the mountains? Big, medium, small. Large things advance, small things go back. And you have to be careful. If I tried to, like, you know, cut off most of the shadow, all of a sudden this would be a smaller shape than the little bit of grass. So if I cut this off here, and you have this shape and that shape are the same distance, this tries to jump forward. So always remember that you have your largest shapes in the foreground. This is the biggest mountain. These are the biggest trees. They get smaller as they go back. We want more of the shadow, because we want big, medium, and then, you know, the little tree line for the lower line bushes, small. So again, we want to make sure that in the foreground, middle ground, and background. So we want to be aware of these proportions, and I made this a little bigger because of composition, but not just composition, it's about depth. Biggest cloud, big cloud. You know, medium cloud back here, small cloud, smaller still. Things get smaller as they recede, and that's really important when we're dealing with landscape. The next thing is contrast. Higher contrast here, less contrast here. High contrast, medium contrast, low contrast. High contrast, low contrast. So again, you want high contrast in the foreground, low contrast in the background. We also can deal with, you know, we want detail. So things that we want more detail in the foreground, less detail in the background, more detail here, less detail here. More little shapes here, getting simpler as they go back. So those are the three. We have size, we have contrast or value, and then we have detail, and those are the three. But in painting, we have a fourth. We have color. And that's where people will start talking about atmospheric perspective. An atmospheric perspective normally says that on a like an afternoon lit sort of a day, that things are going to get duller and less contrast as they go back. And sometimes they go lighter. Now this is interesting because, again, the way the clouds changed. In this instance, the hills are getting grayer and they're getting less contrast and they're getting a little lighter as they go back. With this, well, now we've reversed it. We have that now there's a little more light here, and you know, now we have the shadow cast over there. And so this looks like it's getting darker as it goes back, but we still have a lighting scenario where this is supposed to be, this is darker, and then this gets a little washed out, gets lighter, and then we've got the cast shadow over there. So this is still getting lighter, but then there's a cast shadow. As an artist, you'd say, all right, well, this might start to monkey with the relationship. I might leave the cast shadow, but I might lighten it just a bit, blow it out a little bit, so it makes more sense, because it's the cast shadow of one of these clouds. So these are the things that we're keeping. Pardon me. The other thing about atmospheric perspective is atmospheric perspective says things get bluer as they go back, and so this green here has a little more yellow, and this green back here has a lot more blue to it. That's not always the case. The bluer thing, if I've got a sunset and that, I've got this bright red sunset, it's warm in the background, it's red in the background, and so that would mean that things are going to probably be in shadow in the foreground, getting lighter as they go back, getting warmer or redder as they go back. So remember, with atmospheric perspective, it can have, there's times when it will, the rule will change because you have to be consistent. So if this was red back here or yellow, I would have my cooler colors getting lighter as they go back. I'd have my contrast still dissolving, getting less as they go back. But in the values would be getting lighter and lighter and lighter as they get further back into that sunset. So we're going to go ahead and paint this. So I'm going to put this over here. We got a quick little drawing of this, and we got my little colors laid out on this piece of solid surface, or Corian as it's called, or used to be called. Now there's all kinds of companies that make solid surface. You don't have to have this. This was white at one time, and now it's no longer white. I could bleach this out if I wanted to, but I always got to be. You want to be careful around if you use bleach, because if you don't neutralize it when you start putting your colors down over an area that still has bleach in it, it'll monkey with your colors. Your colors will be blown out and bleached a little bit, and who knows what it's going to do once you get on the paper. So you don't want that. So anyways, I've got my colors laid out. I've got my Cad Yellow Lemon, my Cad Yellow Deep. I've got Yellow Ochre. We have Raw Sienna. We have Cad Red Light. We have Alizarin Crimson. We have Burnt Sienna, which is a brown red. We have a Theo Rose and a Theo Violet. Now again, for people that take my classes, a lot of colors have different names. And the Theo Rose and Theo Violet is one of these pigments that have 40 different names, because there are no standards of names in the painting industry. So there can be 40 different names with 40 different companies of the same paint. And so it can make it a little hard when you first get started when you're painting. If you look on the back of the paint, though, it will have a listing of what the pigment is used. And so if it was a red, it'd start with R, and then there'd be a number. If it was a blue, it'd start with B, and then a number. If it was a yellow, it'd start with Y, and then a number. And that could tell you exactly what pigment is being used. So it doesn't matter what the name is. If the pigment matches the pigment you're looking for, well, then you don't have to worry. But again, I think these are M. Graham paint. I like them, but I also use Winsor & Newton. I use Grumbacher. I'll use Holbein. I just use them until I'm not like one of these people that's like only certain paint companies. I use all different kinds of paints, just depending on, there's certain paints I like out of one company, certain paints I like out of another. And so I'll use whatever. This particular company, someone said, I got sent these and bought a few here and there. And M. Graham is just a nice company. Now, what I do like about the M. Graham paint that is unique, so it doesn't matter who you're getting it from, Holbein or Winsor & Newton or whoever, none of them that I know of, except for this company, they use blackberry honey as their binder. It's what keeps the paint together. So they take the pigment and they grind it with a whole bunch of honey. And the rest of the companies use gum arabic. And honey and gum arabic is a sap from a tree that's water soluble. But the difference between using gum arabic and honey is that I like to leave my paints out to dry. So I use my paints almost like they're pan colors. You can buy, mostly in this country, a lot of people use the tubes. For whatever reason, Europe has more of a tradition of using pan color. So with Winsor & Newton, you can buy tubes, which is what these are, or pan colors. Now, I don't know how many other companies really deal with pan colors. Like, I don't think you can get Graham pan color. And I've never tried to get pan colors and Holbein and all those, so I can't speak for all those different companies. But most companies, you can get them in tubes. You might say, well, what's the difference? Well, some people will squeeze out their tubes and you have fresh wet paint. The problem is with that wet paint is when you go to pick it up in your brush and then you try to water it down, because it's so stick and tacky, it's like honey. Sometimes you'll get a little dollop of paint that never got dissolved, and you touch that to the paper, and all of a sudden you got this bright color. That little dot where the pigment just saturated the paper. And once you've done that, game over. And so I like to squeeze my paint out and then let it dry. So I'm essentially re-wetting it every time. And so that's why I'm saying these are kind of like pan colors, because I'm essentially letting my paint dry out. And I don't like to have wet paint out that's not dried, because again, every time I do, I have to make extra cautious and take extra care to make sure that it's not got some little drop of undissolved paint in my brush, and it just drives me nuts. So I just go ahead and I let it dry out like so. Now, I don't like to keep them in little, I have a flat surface that I've got these on, and I don't keep them in little reservoirs either, because that presents another problem. When you do the reservoirs, all of a sudden you have paint that will, that's always in water, and you start to get, sometimes you get mold or mildew or things like that in your paint. And I just, again, I don't like that. I don't want that. So again, I keep these so they, since they're on a flat surface, they dry out every time. They stay very dry. Now again, if I had certain colors that were gum arabic, if they dry and then wet and dry and wet and dry and wet, that gum arabic starts to get a little, it starts to get brittle and stuff like that, and things can start to get, will break down and get crumbly or other stuff like that. Well, the cool thing is, with the blackberry honey that they use, that never happens because blackberry honey pulls moisture out of the air. Now, the downside is for some people, I mean, I like it, but other people like it, never truly dries. Your paint will always be a little tacky. It will never truly dry the same way. But it's that fact that it never dries down when it's in a big clump like this is good, because that means it'll never start to fracture and break and do all those and get brittle like the gum arabic. So it's really just my own, personal taste for what we're doing here. So what I'm going to do on something like this or large like this, we're going to start with the sky. We always try to look and say, hey, what's my game plan? Well, my game plan is I'm going to start in the sky, I'm going to glaze that, and then I'm going to come down here and start glazing here where we'll be separate. We'll leave the mountains dry so that we have a barrier between the two wet areas. And that should help me get, keep my paint nice and clean. Now, the other thing is I can just tell just by what I just did, I did not wash my brushes out the last time I used these. I didn't wash them out with soap and water. There's certain paint that will stain your brush if you don't wash it out really good. And so even though I'm pulling this out as much as I can, there's always going to be this sort of this dull gray that I've got in this brush right here. And there's, maybe you can't see on there, but it's very light. But again, if I don't get rid of that, there's always going to be gray in whatever color I mix. So if you use soap and water, you won't have that problem. You'll keep your brushes nice and clean. For me, I think I got most of it out, so I'm not gonna worry if there's a little bit left in there. And so I want this sky to stay very soft. And so, plus this is different papers have different absorbency. This is 300-pound paper, and so it's a little more absorbent than 140-pound paper. And so if you're not careful, it'll just suck up all your moisture from your washes, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and wet this down. So that way that the paint will flow really nicely. Yeah. Okay. If I can't tell, kind of look at this at a slight angle to see whether the paper is shiny. That will tell you whether it's got, if it's wet everywhere. And you'll be able to see very quickly if you look down at it like so, whether it's got any dry areas. We don't want any dry areas. So I'm re-wetting this a second time. And again, this is because I want this sky to really flow. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead now. I got some crumbles on here from the eraser. Don't want those there. They're going to collect paint around them, and that's not going to be what I want. So okay. Okay. Now, unfortunately, I did all that where I was using an absorbent surface, that little paper towel, and so now I'm going to have to re-wet some of these areas a little bit. All right, I think that's enough. So what I'm going to do is, in the light here, we have sort of some warm shadows, and so I want to have some of that warmth in the sky. I'm going to glaze this basically. This is not going to be the end color that I want, but I do want some warmth up in here. I'm going to use a light wash of sort of an orange, or red orange, if you will. It's a little bit, so that we can I don't know. I think that's not quite what I want. I'm going to use a little bit more the yellow and just lighten it up just a bit. Maybe use just a little bit of this red in here. I grabbed a Theo red because it's a little more translucent. I think that'll probably be about what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and come in here. This is a wet brush in a wet area. And we're going to go ahead and just float some of this color in here for some of these clouds. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and float some of that in there. I think we're going to come over here, go ahead and modify the color just a bit. And we're going to go ahead and bring some of that color into the sky back here. Okay. So now I think that's going to be a little on the dark side. So we're going to come over here, because I just want I want it to tint just a little bit that sky. I think we'll bring a little bit more, some warmth in here. Maybe some warmth over here. And then maybe just a little bit back there. Okay. There's also a little bit right through there. Bring some warmth in there. So again, this is mostly yellow with just a little bit of red. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to, again, I want some of these colors very softly. I'm going to deal with the sky. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up a mixture. I want sort of a turquoise blue. I think I'm going to use a little bit of my cerulean blue. And I'll start off with a lighter wash of the cerulean blue. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and darken it as it comes up. We're going to put a little bit more paint in my brush every time to bring a little bit more paint into the sky. I think I want a little bit more down here where it touches. Well, maybe not. Scratch that. We're going to go ahead and leave it as is because I can always darken that up. As it comes off of there, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to, again, bring in a little more color, a little darker color too, varying the value just a bit. Okay. Now I'm going to bring in here a little bit more color. In other words, a little darker color, I should say, varying the value as well. I'm also darkening the cerulean with a little phthalo blue. That's also a warm blue, turquoise blue of sorts. Maybe a little bit less so than the cerulean, but it's also a darker color. And so I'm using that to darken this up a bit. Whoa! That was wet. That was just more than I wanted. I think I'm going to grab my round brush in here and it's got red in it. That's not what I want. Let's go ahead and take that back out. That might just have to be there. There was quite a bit of paint on that tip. I can soften that, it looks like, but there's some of that that's not going to come out. So what we're going to do, and I don't think it's out of control, it's perhaps more than what I wanted, but there's a little bit of a randomness factor to watercolor that even in the most controlled instances you can never now I was going to use the word escape, but that's not probably the word I want to choose. What the word is the fact that you want some of that. There's some, it's not happy. Happy accents might be too, but water flows, and so there's times where you'll get this, and as a watercolorist, you just learn to work with it. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm going, hey, look, that was maybe a little darker, but the sky needs to get a little darker anyways. So I'll darken it around that. I'll drop some color in here. We'll just let this kind of bleed around a little bit because it is, again, this is watercolor. So, and I did wet this down. I did want some of this sort of bleeding because that'll give me some soft edges around this sky. I think there's too much transition in the sky. This starts to look like maybe shadow. So that means we got to come back in here and darken sort of the middle value area of this sky. Like so. Let's see if I can take this 1/2-inch brush. Let's see if I can pull. I might try to pull some of this off, pull it around a little bit as well. All right, so I'm just trying to get enough blue in here that it looks like, I don't want it to seem as patchy. It feels just a little patchy right now, so trying to get it not to feel that way. All right. So, again, I'm trying to work with this so again that patch doesn't look like it's too much. But I'm going to go ahead and keep trying to get some color in there. Okay, so we're going to leave this and let this dry out. We're going to move down here to this part. And again, usually when people start landscapes, they start they tighten up. And so what we want to do instead is loosen up a little bit. Now this photograph, this was printed off my printer. We lost a little bit some of the golden tones that was in this field. So I'm going to try to bring some of that back. Again, we're going to leave the mountains alone, but I think the first thing I want to do is we're going to bring some of the yellows. Now I'm going to do a little bit so. There's times when we'll do a little glazing, we might call it. This is actually more of an underpainting, which means I'm going to put some color down that's not going to be the color that's going to stay there. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, first off, I'm going to glaze this whole, or in other words, do an underpainting with a yellow on these trees, this whole tree line coming forward that's in light. I'm going to leave the mountains alone for now, but we're going to glaze under here using our brush. Okay. Running out of some moisture there, so I need to reload the brush. Try this again. So again, this is going to come down here. Now this has more yellow than this, which we don't want more yellow in the background. We want yellow is one of the first colors that fades as you get into the landscape. So as you go further back, you're going to be losing more and more yellow. So I got to be careful that, again, I don't set myself up where I'm reversing how things actually work. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little more yellow out over here, a little bit more intensity, getting less as it goes back. We've also got this our field here, and the field has quite a bit of yellow too. It actually has some yellows along here that get a little bit oranger. So I'm going to add a little bit of that red-orange to this. And then other parts of this that go very much, and it's actually a little more neutral, but so I think I'll neutralize it just a bit. Let's do it this way. I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of this. Well, so I could use a little bit of burnt umber and a little bit of Payne's gray, or I could go the other way, which is basically using purple. And there's other ways too, but I could use your raw sienna and your different things like that. Oh, that's phthalo. Okay, so that was phthalo blue. I was trying to reach for ultramarine, but that's not a big deal. It just means it's going to stain pretty heavily. So I'm not worried about that a lot here. But as you get more and more into painting, more advanced watercolor technique, you're going to want to be aware of just how much it stains. That's the word we're looking for. Wow, just really tripping over that one. But you just want to be sure how much is that going to stain. Am I using a staining color, a non-staining color? And that will change the look. So it is important to understand kind of what's going on. That's a little too much red, but this was a little too green. I'm going to go ahead and use maybe a little more, just a tiny bit, and bring just some of the yellow back. And I'm going to check this. I could use my paper towel, check that, and I think I'm going to go ahead and lighten this, and we're going to go ahead and bring this down. Again, this will be a little more neutral. I think I'm going to bring just a little bit more, because I think I'll actually go over this with some duller paint. So I'm going to bring just a little bit more, some of this this yellow green into here. So we want some of that yellow green. I might bring just a little bit more lemon yellow into here again. Lemon yellows really favor the green side as we manipulate them, if you go over them or what have you. So let's bring some of that in there. That's not a bad thing either. I'm going to make sure that I don't get it too dark, because I don't want it too intense. I want this really washy, and some people would say very watery washes. Yeah, we want it really thin. We don't want it too detailed. We don't want it too. We don't want to. We don't want to make a commitment just yet. We want to sneak up. We want to change this and modify it as we see fit, as we have more and more color sort of relationships. I'm going to bring some of this red in here, because there's some areas, again, where the yellows get a little bit on the orange side. So I'm going to bring just some of the warmth of the red in there. In a couple places, there's another couple places where it does that again. So I'm going to take some of this with some of this red, and again, just bring some of the orange in here, just a little bits of that. We want some of that. That will give us a little more information. Okay. As far as that goes. Okay. And down here we have, this is all in shadow. So I'm going to bring a little bit of this in here, and I'm going to use some green, I think. Maybe and even though it's in shadow, it is in the foreground. So we're going to want some warmth. So I've got some red and some green, and we're going to use this sort of and it's going to make it look like this this olive green, or army fatigues as some people might call it, but we want, again, just a little bit of warmth in that. That's why I add just a little bit of the red, just to let us, so the greens, warm greens have a little red in them, and we want this to have some warmth because it is, just a little bit. If it gets too cold, too cool, it will start to feel strange. It'll start to feel bizarre, and part of that is because there's a warmth everywhere, even in the shadows, and there's times where we have to look for warm and cool. So sometimes we're like, wait, what? No, hold on. People say shadows are cold. What are you talking about? In general, it's in relationships they're warm and cool. But if you look at the color itself, it's got some warmth. Like if things get too cool, they seem too cold overall. It feels unnatural because there is a little bit of, usually the greens that we see out are not acidic greens, as some people would call them. Which means that they're unnaturally bright green, and if you don't get a handle on that, things will start to look very, very strange, very bizarre. These are starting to hold the edge, and I don't want the edge to hold just yet. I want it to melt a little bit, so I'm stroking this just a little bit of pure water, because again, we're just trying to keep this nice, and we don't want it to. We don't want any edges just yet. We're starting off, with very, very soft edges, and then we'll, continue to manipulate this as we go on with our landscape. So this is just we'll call what you call an underpainting. We're trying to anchor some of the information in here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to come back here once this dries, and we're going to start to work in, some of the hills and so forth and so on. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and do the hills. Now, the hills get a little cooler in the background, so what we're going to do here is I'm going to do a slight gradation going from greener to purple. There'll be a slight, if you've painted the landscape, you'll see, especially if you have a color isolator, which is basically any object with a little hole punched in it. You can take a little card and punch a hole in and hold it up to a color, and you can see it. But if you're in the high country, this is up, in the Sawtooth Mountains. Again, greens will start to get to blue, and then for the cools, but warms, they'll actually start to turn a little violet. So we're going to do that. We're going to have this good greener here, which will be warmer in advance, going cooler as it goes back, or more violet. And so I'm going to go ahead and set some of this up. I'll start with this green. We're going to take a little bit of red to warm it up, just a little bit. Okay. And then we're going to take a little bit of this, and we're going to have it get a little bluer. So we're trying to do a gradation of color. Warmer going cooler. So now we've got a blue-green. And then we're going to take and make just a little bit of violet on this. So that's how we're gonna do this. Now we don't want too much violet, but we're gonna start with a light wash. Again, going from greener to more violet. This is another way of bringing red in. I can bring a bright red, or I can bring a duller red, but I want some red in there. So we're going to go ahead and bring some of this this hilltop. Trying to keep a little bit of variation. Because of the distant trees, this will start to get a little irregular because of the tops of the trees, just a scotch on this. And now that we've hit we're no longer in the skyline, this will dissolve a bit, but it's just to make this a little bit rougher, this edge, like it's got overlapping little trees at the top that are making the edge rougher. So that's all I'm doing. Nothing too spectacular, just a little bit of that going on. Gonna weave this down into these yellow trees a little bit. Trying to use varying my marks. I'm turning my brush. I'm trying to make, and the reason why is that especially in landscape, Mother Nature has a wonderful randomness to her, and we're actually we're drawn just naturally to things that are even, things that are not chaotic, because our life does not run well on chaos. We look for rhythms that are getting our, and we just naturally fall into it, and it's not a bad thing, but we have to be aware of it, because nature seems like, now there is an order. Of course, we could talk about, well, nature is not chaotic, there's an order, all that good stuff. And yeah, you can get philosophical about it. But the idea is we want some of the randomness. We want to capture some of the idea that nature is what seems chaotic and seems, there's an order to the disorder, but sometimes it seems like it's, that is not, that it is random. That's just the easiest way to put it. And again, whereas we don't want things random. If we have a random heartbeat, we're in a lot of trouble. If we have, something, I'm trying to think of another analogy, but I just can't think of one. But we don't want that randomness. We want stability. We want evenness. We want rhythms that are, within our circulatory system and electrical system and all this stuff that are not random. We need them to be very precise. And again, nature, it seems just like there's all kinds of stuff happening, and there can be a perceived chaos, if you will. And so we're trying to give a nod to that. Now, these mountains are further back. We won't see them all frumpy, so they can be clean edged. So again, that will start to read as, less detailed hill versus more detailed hill, and all this sort of stuff. So that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to hint, because this is not going to be, we're going to be doing some photorealistic illustration that we're going to spend 30 or 60 hours on painting in watercolor. That's just not what we're doing here. And I don't know that you guys would want to have to put up with all that, but we do want to bring in some of the basic general ideas of what's happening in this landscape. And so we want some of this. We're doing the shift diff color right now. We're going to I'm going to simplify this a lot. When you're actually doing, I do a lot of don't do as much of it in watercolor. I've done it, but I usually do oil in plein air painting. But again, you've got tons of information, millions of little details, and you have to simplify it and take just enough that it looks like you're still painting the scene, but you've simplified it. There's no other better word for it. You've changed considerably all the chaos and left just enough that people go, okay, yeah, I can see that in 2 hours. Where you can paint some people, yeah, I know what you're doing. I know where that is. And it comes through simplifying all kinds of stuff, dropping out all kinds of information, and honing in on the most, on the simplest stuff. It's a caricature, if you will, but there has to be enough in a caricature for you to know who they're painting or who they're drawing. If you don't know what's going on, then that's not usually a good thing for the caricature artist. So again, we're getting just a little bit of this transition of the purples and the violets in the mountain. And there's some cast shadows where even over here we're going to get some of this purpling happening because of shadows and stuff like that. And so we're going to introduce just a little bit of that. We could introduce a ton of it if it was actually, I guess, happening in the painting, but it's not. There's just little vestiges of it here and there, and so we're going to put some of it here and there, and try to make this look a little more like this scene. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that, let that dry down, even some of the shadows in here, you know, if we got into this, we, you know, start to bring some of these in. And so we're looking for the larger chunks. We could come in here and bring some of this in for some of the larger shadow shapes that start to happen on this hillside. Just little vestiges of it. We're not going to get super into it. We're doing just some little bits. Now this wasn't here before, and what happened, I was moving brushes around. I dropped a brush by accident, but we'll probably be able to take this, and that little blue spot out. Hopefully. We're going to give it our best shot. But we're going to go ahead and let that dry down. And I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring in, again, just a little bit more of some of the warmth in this field. Now that's on dry paper, and this is, so I'm going to go ahead and soften this by getting just a clean stroke of water and bringing that back in there, because that was too much. It was too much of an edge, and so we needed to soften it down. So I went ahead and softened it. Let's bring this down a little bit more. And we'll bring just a little bit more color into it. Whoops. That's perhaps too much color. Maybe just a scotch more of red to that yellow. So it's still a yellow, but it's just got a little bit oranger as I add tiny bits of red to it. And we'll try to put some of this back in here. So just a little, again, a little bit of color. Not everywhere, but just some here and there. Now that dry brushed, because there wasn't hardly any water there. So I'm going to come back in there, see if I can soften that just a bit. Okay. Something about like that. Okay. So I'm trying to there's some grasses that overlap, and they become sort of these striations, and I was trying to get just a little bit of that happening. Just a bit, just a scotch, just a smidgen, just a bit. These are still watery mixtures. Usually when you'll have people painting, they'll talk about thicker mixtures being sort of milky and the thin ones being watery, and then we're even going to do some dry brushing in here at some point. Not right now, but we are going to bring in some dry brushing at a certain point in here. We're also going to begin to glaze this down. I'm going to have a couple colors in here, I think. So again, we're going to have a warmer green. We're going to have a cooler green. And we're going to have greens in between. So I want a few different types of greens that we're going to use in the shadows. And maybe some cooler greens in that. So we'll take a little bit of our phthalo blue, which is a very warm blue, and we'll keep this out here to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to take my eyes out of focus and look at some of these colors. So see how this is. So this is really blue, and in fact it's too cold to be where it is. So we're going to go ahead and bring some of this. That's right, I got that really wet. For right now, I'm not going to worry about that a ton, but I do want some of the. I want the fact that before this goes into shadow, it's very warm, very yellow. It's there, but it's pretty soft. So we'll try to bring some of this in again where we have the very yellow grasses coming in here, and then they're going into they're going into shadow. Okay, we're going to take some of this out because that again is just a little bit too harsh for right now. Too hard of an edge, I think. But we're just going to go ahead and again bring in some of the yellow over here. And this will start the edge. That's that little bit in sunshine. And then it's going to start to come into shadow. Okay. Now again, I'm going to look for groups in I'm going to use longer striations, so this is taller grass as it comes forward, and then make smaller marks as I go, as I get closer to here, because that's further back. So I just want to, all that means is that I'm trying to indicate. Now right here, I'm not doing a whole lot of, this is going to be very soft, but I still want to be thinking about some of that. We're going to be longer grasses, getting shorter as they come up, getting bigger and taller as they come back. So I want to be looking for some of that. Again, this is going to be, and again, this is not as dark as it can be. We're going to sneak up on getting darker. So again, we're keeping this very soft. This is going to bleed a little bit into some of these areas. And again, we want some of that. This is watercolor after all. We do want some of this bleeding up into there. That way, I dried some of that off just a scotch. Whoops. Okay, there we go. Okay. And we're going to keep working some of this in here, so we can start to get some of this darker. Now again, this isn't too dark, and this is going to go darker still, but we're trying to get some of the variations of yellower and warmer versus cooler in this grass. Okay, so that's getting a little bit, probably just a scotch. Well, I'm going to take some of that off for now. Let's take some of that out. Yeah, I like that better. So, knocking it back, keeping it fairly soft in the beginning. It's getting drier, so I got to be, again, this is, since this is 300-pound paper, it really takes it sucks up the moisture very quickly. And obviously, so right now it's starting to dry out, and I'm getting some edges. Now I don't mind that oh wow, that's way too much. Let's go ahead and grab some more, and I want to keep it some softer. I don't mind that there's some edges that are kind of peeking through, but that's not the point right now. We're trying to indicate a little bit of the grass, but it's really more about the shape. This isn't about playing with the grass. This is more about warm and cool. So within this grass, there's cooler areas and warmer areas, and we want to be showing some of that in this part of the paintings, where so we want to give it a nod, if you will. So all right, there we go. And we'll just let that. We're going to let that sort of sit there for now. All right. Now, I don't think this is dry enough, so, but it might be semi-wet. Let's see if we can get away with, I'm going to put, well, no, I think I will keep this. I'm going to see if I can bring some of the, warmth into these greens up here. I think we're going to keep this softer, so I'm going to go ahead and put down a wash, and I'm going to basically do what I was doing here, which is just get some of this, just get a little bit of the tint of this green over here. Okay. And let's see. There's parts of this that are greener, parts of this are slightly bluer, and I'm going to, again, do something similar to what I was doing here in the grass, where we just want some of the warm versus cool stuff going on. Just a bit of it. Okay. Let's see. All right, so I got a little bit of that washed in. I'm going to go ahead and try to pull some of this down into here. Soften this just a little bit more. You know, I think some of this is a little firm for what it's supposed to be, so we're going to try to soften this, blow it out in a couple places. Leave some of it there. Don't take out all of it. But again, it's a little bit much for some of these areas. I'm going to take some of that out. Okay. All right. Now I think I might be able to see if we can lay in some of the color for the sky. So I'm going to get my bigger 1-inch brush here. I'm also going to clean this up a little bit because this, you don't need all that green in there. Okay. Like so. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and again take some of this out. We're going to start to play with some of the violets in the sky. And so whenever I talk to people about watercolor, if you're trying to do it in somewhat of a controlled way, the painting is like checkers. You do have to plan out a painting, and of course, depending on the style, an oil painting or an acrylic painting or any sort of thing like that, you do have to do some sort of planning. So it's like checkers, but with watercolor, it's more like chess. So with watercolor, we have to be a lot more mindful of, you know, how we're going to progress, and that's kind of why I'm here. We're going to do some of this, but I let people know about that because I work in both mediums, and I've worked in a lot of other different mediums, acrylic and casing and gouache and egg tempera and others, you know, and things like that. And you just have to with watercolor or any water related medium, but watercolor the most, you have to really work out, okay, here's my next step. Here's what I'm going to be doing. And we want to do that. If you don't do that, it's going to be much harder for you. I think I'm going to glaze into this. We're going to do this cloud, not that cloud. So this is hanging down here, and I think we're going to glaze into some of this with this red violet. That'll be a little lighter. I think in fact I'm going to bring some straight water right over some of that yellow. But this will be the sort of like the middle values in the family. And so again, we're going to bring in some of this violet, and it's such a pretty color. I mean, it really is. And with watercolor, we always start with our lightest lights. And so this is going to be, we're going to glaze over this with some of the purples as far as that goes. And so we'll bring some of this down into here. And we'll bring some of this down across there. And then again, we're going to bring the darker colors over this. So this is our lightest colors. They'll show through. Now, they won't show through everywhere, because obviously if we come down in here with darker color, you know, it's not going to... I'm gonna get this larger orange, not orange, but this larger brush. I don't know where orange came from. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet down this edge between the two clouds, so that way we'll have a little bit of bleed. I'm going to pull some of that water off so it's not too much bleed, but that will get. So we want to keep this sky soft. And so the only way to control your edges in watercolor, keep them soft, is to have some sort of water there. So if this hits a semi-wet area, it's going to, or it's not dry, it's semi-wet, well then it'll have a little bit of bleed to it. We want just a little bit of that bleed. So again, we're going to come in here and we're going to go ahead and finish this out. Bring some more of this water, the watercolor over onto there, and bring some more of this red into a couple of areas through here. I believe we're going to want. Like so. Okay. Something like that. Okay, now we're going to bring in some of those dark blues. And so we're going to take a little bit of this maybe a little bit of our Payne's gray. I think we're going to start off first with a little bit more that's closer. There's violet blues in here as well, so I'm going to start off with a blue that's a little more violet and one that's not quite as dark. A little watery mixture, if you will. And we're going to bring this into the clouds. Okay. And again, we're just darkening the areas that need to go a little darker. All right. We're going to come over here. I'm going to bring just a little bit more. Value through there. Bring some of this over in here. Okay. Like that. Okay, and let's see if we can bring some more of this in here. All right. Let's see if we can drop just a little bit more blue in here. Let's see. So and again, I'm varying my marks. I am twisting the brush as I use it. Taking my eyes out of focus so I can actually see the shapes that I'm looking at a little better. So we want to be able to view those. And again, this is the darkest part of this cloud is this blue. And so I'm not putting it everywhere. I'm just putting it on where's the shadow side of the clouds are. Even though this cloud is dark, it has a top side and a side and a bottom side. And so the camera turned off for a second, but we're dropping in some of this color in here, trying to get to the point where we can just leave this alone for a bit. So again, I'm going to try to put this blue in, this last little bits, as quickly as possible, and then leave it alone. Now with watercolor, there's an old saying that if it's the color you want when it's wet, it won't be the color you want when it's dry. And that's because watercolor lightens as it dries. And it lightens a lot more with darker colors. So part of the thing that we have to get used to as working in watercolor is, you know, making the color darker or more than what we think it should be, so that by the time it dries, it's what we want. And that can seem very counterintuitive when we first start watercolor. We're like, wait, what? We want to do what? And so that takes some getting used to be sure. Now, if I ever have an area where I'm like, I don't know, did I go a little nuts on that? I'm actually thinking that I may have, because it's going to get lighter, but I don't think it'll get light enough. Well, I can always go ahead and, you know, pull off a little bit with a paper towel. I can use this to check to see if I indeed need to go lighter. I'd rather take off some if it was too dark and then darken a little bit more later than have it dry down and go, man, that cloud got out of control. And the reason I'm erring on the side of it perhaps being the wrong sort of thing is because, again, I don't have any of these values in, and so I can't tell what this is until I've got sort of the hills in and stuff. But I was still a little hesitant. I'm going to see if I can play with this edge just a little bit more while I've got some time. On this thing. And there's just a couple places where I think I need to play with an edge, because if the edge is wrong, well then, you know, it's not going to bode well for the painting. So I'm just playing with this edge right through here. As this cloud sort of trails, a piece of the cloud that sort of breaks off and trails underneath here. So I'm going to go ahead and I just want to start to indicate that a little bit at least. And then we're going to try to play with this little edge through here just a little bit as this comes into there and up into here. Just a bit. Okay. Now apparently this was in the wrong place, so I'm going to go ahead and put some water down there because I had that in the wrong area. I thought it was like a sky hole, and it wasn't. So again, it's you know, watercolor is also fluid. You don't have to worry about, you know, you don't have to be scared about, oh, what happened? Oh, what if I, you know, don't do that. That'll always come back to haunt you if you do. We're going to go ahead and make this a little less regular because this looks like it was sort of scooped out with, it's too round is what it is. So we're trying to make this a little less round. This little opening in the cloud here. So again, we're trying to get some of these edges to happen. We're trying, you know, so, you know, I'm just sort of playing again this edge. I'm putting stuff down, I'm pulling it off. I'm putting stuff down, I'm pulling it off. And I'm trying to make it seem like this is mist, or in this case a cloud, water vapor, drifting across other stuff. So I'm trying to make it a little, I'm trying to break up the edge, is all I'm trying to do. So I'm going to go ahead, well, I think I might, probably going to do this and I wish I had, but I'm going to see if I can do just one last thing. That red seems too bright. So, oh, that's because there was going to be shadow in there, wasn't it? So let's see if I can bring some paint in here, soften this up, and then pull it back off and see if, yeah, okay, so I'm just trying to knock down some of that red just a bit. And the cool thing is with clouds, there's a lot of subtle little areas in here. And so I can do a little something like that very gently and have it go, okay, yeah, that looks fine. Because of the fact there are so many edges. This is so soft, I think I can get away with, this is like the bottom of, again, of another cloud. The underside that's a little bit darker coming in up here, like so. And so I just want to deal with that just a little bit. Again, when we're dealing with clouds and stuff, we do want to keep it light. It's about edge control and color and other things. I'm going to let that stay for now. I might be able to get a little bit going on in this cloud because I don't want anything touching that. Well, this cloud doesn't touch that, so we've got a barrier of dry paper there. So let's see if I can develop that area. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead, in fact, I might even be able to do both of these areas. Let's see, maybe if I start here, just a little bit of that, and a little bit of, dull it down just a little bit, and come in here with a little bit of light value, and then soften that up. Okay. Yeah. Not bad for now. Okay. So this is, I don't want to work this area because it's too close, but I did want to bring this up because I'm going to work this area of cloud right through here. And we do want some of this. Okay. So I'm going to take some of this, and I think I'm going to take some of this off, some of this paint, not paint, water. I'm trying to make it semi-dry paper. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to leave some of the light areas alone. So, yeah, that's what I'm going to, so that's what we want to do. So we're going to come in here. Sorry, I was taking a minute just to take a look at this and try to figure very quickly some of the different shapes. And so, ready to go now. So go into there. Those are like the light middle values and such. Pull some of that out. Then we're going to come in with some of where we're going to get some of the purples, some of the middle values. So we're going to bring these up into here. Like that. Now again, these look so dark because again the hillsides are so light. So, you know, you really have to kind of check your brain, double, you know, because sometimes you're like, hey, wait a minute, what am I doing? That's too dark. And it's like, well, this looks dark because there's no darks in there, and so. And then we're going to come in here with the actual shadows on the clouds, the underside, where we're going to have some of these real darks taking out, you know, getting under there, and then we're going to take some of these that are really a little more blue, just a scotch, and bring some of that in there. That's too strong, so we're going to take some of that back off. But Something about like that. Now again, we're going to take some of this out just a bit. Again, we're not here to detail clouds or any part of this area. We just want just enough information that we go, okay, yeah, that looks cloud-like. Yeah, I mean, we're not here to. We're not going to be, we wouldn't be able to do super detailed, clouds, unless we're going to do, like, make this into a 5-hour, 10-hour painting. And again, that's not what this is supposed to be about. So just go ahead and. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to let that dry down. Since again we're working in different areas, I think we're going to come over here and we're going to deal with some of the. We're going to go ahead and deal with some of the shadow areas. And before I do this, I want it somewhat wet but not soaked. So we're going to wet some of this down a little bit, and then I'm probably going to blot it. So again, that way I don't have, again, where it's really soaked. So again, I kind of took off some of the water. So this is going to have a little bit softer edge than if I hadn't taken the water off, as far as that goes. And I'm looking at just the basic shapes. There's a big cast shadow here. As far as that goes, we've got the light coming from this direction. So And so all I'm doing is I'm looking for some of the shadow shapes in here on these trees, and I'm trying to keep my eyes softened so I get just the. We're not trying to do every little nuance or something like that. That would not. It's just going to start to look busy if that's all we do. And busy meaning there's going to be so many little things, so many little details that we won't have any idea what it is we're looking at. And so we want to avoid that. So again, we're just, if we get some of these shadows in there, it's going to start to feel like some trees, and again, that's what we want. We're also trying to make sure that we're again being random. You don't want all the shapes to look like the same shape, as far as that goes. And then as this goes back, we're also going to try to make now I may not do that in this first pass, because I might need at least this dark to actually be able to see what everything else is around it. But we'll see. All right, so we're gonna keep on keeping on, I guess. We're gonna go ahead and go over here. There's a shadow over here, showing off this tree. It's also then cascading over the tops of these trees back here. This then is again in shadow as this starts to show this one in light. This one starts to get a little darker, and it starts to go a little bit into shadow there. And then some of these are in halftone, and they're just a different color. So I could take some of this off, because it's also, we're hopefully getting a little bluer as we go back, and so I might just really lighten this up and make this like these are the sort of the trees that aren't truly in shadow, but they're also a slightly different color, to also soften the contrast as we're going back onto these things, as far as that goes. So something about like that. And then, we've got some of these guys that start to have some areas that are, shadow, that are in the most important sorts of areas, and so we're going to look for some of those. This is almost like calligraphy. We're going to take our eyes out of focus to see what is the most important, what shapes stand out the most to our eye, and put those in. And it takes some getting used to, but once it's not so, once you've done it a few times, it's not so strange. Again, it's a really great tool. Okay. Take some of this. We're going to lighten some of that out just a little bit on that on those trees, and we're going to leave that alone for now. The next question that we really have, or that I have, is what I'm doing next. I think we're going to come on over into here. This had a water edge. I guess I wasn't seeing this or watching this as closely as perhaps I should have. So I'm going to see if I can bring this out just a little bit, see if I can soften that edge. Again, a lot of times we can work with edges more than we think we can when we first start watercolor, because we're so afraid of what happens if I screw it up, or what happens with this, or what happens with that. And it's really not as, I'm going to take some of that out. Looks like I took all of it out. It's a lot more malleable than we first, a lot of times than what we think it is when we first get started in watercolor. It just seems so hard to control. And there is some of that. I mean, part of watercolor is there's a randomness to it that those that play with watercolor really enjoy. Even controlled watercolor, that you expect some of that. You want some of that. It's just part of the charm. We'll just say charm. Sometimes you're thinking other things, and charm is not the thought. But there is, there's sort of a niceness to it, because it never can really be controlled. I mean, watercolor will change depending on how much, how much water's on the paper, water in the brush, the type of water, how hard your water is, the amount of moisture in the air, the type of paper. So there's all these different things, these variables. And again, that's kind of what makes it fun. It's what makes it challenging, and it makes it fun. And so, if it was super easy, why, there wouldn't be, any reason to keep doing it. It would just, okay, whatever. On to the next thing. Kind of like climbing mountains. If climbing mountains were a challenge, people probably wouldn't do it as much. Not near as fun, not near as exciting. So we want some of that. We want to capture some of this. I'm using some dry brushing now to try to kind of indicate some of the overlapping grasses in this meadow. Just a little bit of what's going to eventually be detail in here. I'm bringing some of the, I'm trying to bring some of the, because there's some lighter grasses here. That's a little bit much. Some lighter grasses that are coming across here. That are then also woven in with these greener grasses. And again, they start to overlap just a little bit to create some bits of depth in here that are very nice. They help, and so the spacing between those are going to get closer together the further away they get. They're also going to get softer, like that line I just made. Too much of a line, so we had to soften it up. Went over it with water. That's how we did it. Okay, so this, we want to see, more of these and that, and I'm just starting this, so let's go ahead and see if we can actually bring in a little bit more of a crisper line right through here. A little bit brighter too, actually. We're thinking, okay, now let's also bring some green in here, because again, there's some greener grasses that are growing in and weaving into here as well. So there's just these little bits of smaller. Gotta be careful that they don't get too distinct. That's really distinct, that shape. So we just soften that a little bit. I'm using my flat brush because again, these are very linear as far as that goes. Maybe I'll do this a little like dry brush into wet. I think this is, the brush was just a little bit too wet. And so now, there we go. It's because it's into a wet area, it'll soften slightly, but it won't be the same as if I dry brushed it onto dry paper. So again, we're going to use some of the paper itself to help judge how to create detail as far as that goes. And there's also some little things here. They're getting a little bigger as they come closer. Now I can't just make them floating shapes, so I had to connect them a little bit. Otherwise, again, they won't It won't seem right. They won't have that connection. I'm trying to think of a different word other than connection, but that's the best word for it. Alright, so again, we're just going to bring some of this in here. Little bits of it. Little bits of that there. Got some stuff that's coming forward into this. A little bit of grass that's coming off from back there and coming forward just a little bit. Alright, so we're going to soften that up a little bit. I think we're going to go ahead and grab this. And we're going to do some of the same things here where we got this. And let's see if we can. Okay. Okay. And I'm going to glaze this gently down here. So there's a little less contrast there than there's over here. Because we want less contrast there, more contrast in the foreground. Okay, I like that. You know, we're getting, you know, I like that. So I think that's going to work fine. We're going to come back over here into our trees, I think. Bring a little bit of, this is sap green, so there's this warm green I keep using. This is it, it's sap green. I'm adding a little bit of raw sienna to it. I think it's a little wet, so we're going to take this out from the ferrule. Start to see if we can maybe bring this down here for a little bit more sort of the half tone. That's too yellow. So I'm going to bring some more the greener side of this. As far as that goes. Now we don't want to do this everywhere, because if we do this everywhere it starts to seem like detail. So we're going to be a little cautious on this. Probably not bring it any further than there. What I want to do on the lid side is I'm going to bring some other green in here, because again it doesn't seem, it's only it's too light still. So we're going to come over here and bring just a little bit more color into this into these trees. A little more color there. Got a little bit more yellow green. We're going to bring in here. Nice color, I think. We got to be careful that we don't seem like we have. We're going to try and get three values just in the most important places on these trees. For those that have had my class, you're like, wait, I thought there were 6 values in cast shadow, and well, there's just so much going on. We don't have that sort of detail in any one area, and so we're just going to go ahead and keep it to a minimum in terms of the detail. We're going to try to just simplify it over and over again. So I keep this, glaze some of that up through there, glaze some of that up through there. Bring a little bit more blue in here so it's sort of almost a true green, and see if we can bring some of this in here, some of these little areas. So we're trying to bring just a little bit more pop or contrast, but we won't want too much back there because those are distant trees. Okay, go ahead and bring some of the where you have the trees meeting the meadow. They get slightly darker in a couple of key places. That helps it differentiate between the two. And we're just trying to get hints of that. We're not trying to, put copious amounts of detail in here. We're trying to get just enough. We're trying to suggest. That's something artists talk about all the time. We're just going to suggest it. But on all that means, we're just putting enough information for the eye to go, okay, yeah, that looks like that must be a clump of trees. And that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to get just enough information that the eye goes, I think I've seen something similar in my experience, and it must be A, B, C, or D. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and let this dry and come back. Went ahead and has dried down a little bit. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go into the hills this time. And I think the hill here again is maybe, well, we're going to go ahead, I think we're going to go ahead and put a wash on it. Darken it a little bit overall, just a bit. I'm going to take a little bit of, I've been using so much this sap green, but this time I used a little bit of Viridian, using a little bit of the red in the Viridian. And this is an alizarin crimson. It's got a little bit of a blue undertone to it. And then we're going to go ahead and just glaze or darken the hill a little bit. Go ahead and grab this little 1/2 inch. It'll be a little easier to control, perhaps, than that other one. Like so. Now we can go ahead, before this creates a water line, we're going to want to come in here and cut around these little trees a little bit. Like so. Okay, so once we've done that, again, we want to wet all this down. Now, because the sky is blue, it'll reflect a little bit of its color. Some people will call this ambient light. But basically, since there's a blue color to the sky, it's going to get a little bit bluer as you go up the hill. As it comes down the hill, it's going to get a little warmer. So I'm going to add a little bit more red to this. And we're going to bring a little bit more of the warmer red as the hill moves away from the skyline. So that's just, again, to give us the whole idea where we're thinking about generalities, but this general idea of how the color shifts gently on something like a hillside is really quite, can give a illusion of depth and reality that even all the detail in the world, if it ignores that one little relationship, it's not gonna feel as real. And so even when we are simplifying things, we're still trying to be aware of what actually is happening to the color, to the values, and some things like that. So now that we, by the time we've darkened this a little bit, again, let's check this up here. I think this it's a little too, that's probably a little better. This little knob up there is probably just a bit much as far as that goes. But I think we can live with it. Again, this is, as we said, a caricature. And I'm going to work in pieces: foreground, middle ground, background. Okay, so we're going to come in here and we're going to look at the we have a light side versus shadow side, and again in the shadows we're going to start to get some of the blue. In this case, we're going to go blue-violet, in fact. And if we've got some of these, again, some of our trees, we have breaks in the trees, we have shadows in the trees. This will be very, very soft as we put some of this in. Again, this is some of that tree line with overlapping tree line. You're going to get, again, some lighter and darker areas because of the tree line itself. And so we're putting some of that in right now. We're then going to let this dry a little bit. Or I could come over here and take some of this off with a paper towel. This also will take color, so let's see. Didn't take a lot of color. Mostly I'm trying to take off some of that moisture. And now that we've got that, again, we're going to look at this once again. And again, we're going to look for some of the main shapes of this, again, of this tree line that have little bits of, this is still pretty wet. So I was hoping it would hold a little bit more than what it did. Just a bit, not a ton. And part of this is probably because I didn't control. So when you load a full brush like this, you can take out, and control how wet it is by pulling out color from the back of the brush, not the front, or it's gonna pull out all the color. So I'm going to take some of this out. And now this will hold just a little bit more mark than if I didn't do this. So this is supposed to be, again, a little bit, the whole tree line, you have areas that overlap and you start to get some of this happening like that. And so we want some of that. And that's what we're trying to recreate, just a little bit of this, you know, the tree line, how it's weaving in and out some of the other stuff. Like so. Again, we just want to indicate we're not trying to do individual trees, but we do want some of the larger groupings of shapes and how those shapes are looking on this on this hillside. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and play with some of this, about like that. Again, I don't want too much of this. I don't want it to seem like I'm trying to do, again, every little tree. That's not what this is for. This does come down into here, though, where we get some of these shadows that are, you know, coming up and behind these guys and interacting with them. You know, merging with them in some places and moving away from other, you know, moving away from them in others. And so we do want some of that. So, again, just enough that we can start to get a feel for what's going, you know, sort of what's just an indication. An indication means I'm squinting my eyes and I'm looking at just the very basic, some of the basic shapes. Now, I got to be careful, because if these start to feel too sporadic or broken up, then they won't have. So I was trying to get a little. There's a little bit of a tree line coming across here that I was trying to deal with, and if the shapes get too, if you break them up too much, they just start to look like dots. The dots have to merge into some sort of a family. They have to have a relationship, and so that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to bring some more of those the marks that will start to, again, create the illusion of something happening here, as far as that goes. So just a little bit, and I think that has enough that we kind of get a feel for it. I think over here there's a part where this goes darker and this goes lighter. So again, it's just the basic relationship of things sitting next to other things, with light and shadow. And again, just a little bit goes a long way. If I can go, okay, this shape here is darker, this shape is lighter, and then this goes into shadow again, it's going to have a greater feeling of reality. The other thing that we need is we need to make sure that this hillside is still darker than this cloud up here. I'm not quite sure it is. I'm going to grab some of this sap green. Sap green has a lot of yellow to it. I'm going to put a little bit more, blue to it, I think. And as something moves off here, we don't want it to wander off the page, so we're going to darken a little bit of this going off the page. So we're going to try to darken it, plus we're going to try it so that it doesn't, again, the eye doesn't travel off that page. But we're also going to try to You can integrate this a little bit so it's just holds this together a little bit more. It's kind of a, some people call this a unifying wash, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to unify different shapes, pull them together into larger families, so again that they start to have a relationship. Because again, if they get too if they just seem too sporadic, then they don't say anything. They don't have anything to say. But it's once they start to become families that that's where the power really comes through. That's what we're looking for. So like these guys here could probably come a little darker in a few places and sort of merge into this shape that is a little stronger. Is it's that's now a group. And whereas before it was just too dissimilar, it wasn't groupy enough. if that's a term, it just wasn't groupy enough. As this goes here onto the outside, it's coming from behind, so there's a little bit of shadow that pushes this a little forward as this heel comes from behind. So I'm trying to put the edge on there first, and then we're going to bring this in and we're going to give it a little bit more blue, because again it's supposed to be going back. Not only is it supposed to be getting bluer, but it's supposed to be a little duller. So I need to make sure that's the case as well. Now this isn't dry entirely, though it's dry enough. That's quite an edge. But we don't want it to go, we don't want it to, what's the word I'm looking for? We don't want the edge to be too firm. That's the edge I'm looking for. So, that's the term I'm looking for, is that we don't want this edge right here to be just too sharp. Sharp edges will make things start to advance. And this is supposed to be receding, so we just want to keep that in mind as we're painting this. Again, as this gets darker, again, this will start to separate from sky to land. And now usually with landscapes and things, usually we'll work on what's called a higher key with watercolor. With watercolor, you really have to kind of build it up. You know, unless you're just, you know, there's some people that do landscapes so much they could do it in their sleep. But most of us that aren't to that level, will build it slowly and sort of sneak up on it, if you will. And it just, so again, you're working in layers, and you can darken it down slowly and with more control. And so again, usually people will get, like, you know, what's higher. Let me try this again. When you're working in a higher key, it means that your values are a little lighter. So as long as you have value relationships that look accurate, you could leave them a little bit lighter and they'll be fine. Watercolors do that a lot because it's a little easier than trying to match exact values, the exact color relationships. You can get close many times, but getting that exact color relationship is very, very hard. And most people, you know, it doesn't have to be. It just, you know, to create an emotional response, it can be close. And so a lot of people are like, yeah, it's close enough, and it's what I want, and it's looking good, and it's giving the feeling that I want. And so there's some times we don't have to, you know, make a portrait of the scene. In other words, we can change it slightly. We can manipulate it. We can have fun with it. And that's what people do when they're many times where they'll be like, it's close enough. And that doesn't mean that they don't care. It just means that it's giving, you know, you don't need to go any further than what you want it to look like. And so again, it's not about making a photograph of a scene many times. It's about manipulating the scene to create the feeling that we want in the viewer. And that's what, and that's all we need. It doesn't have to be any more, and that's fine. I'm going to try to keep these mountains a little bit softer and a little bit less detailed. The individual trees are going to become big groups that are these striations going up the mountains, and the mountains are twisting and turning backwards and this way and that way. And so that will then... So we've got darks in the foreground getting lighter as they go back, which is different than a lot of times you have light in the front, and it's getting, you know, you have light in the front, it gets darker as it goes back a little bit. This is the opposite. It's actually getting a little bit lighter as it goes back. And so I need to... It's also getting lighter and a little duller. So I need to keep that in mind as I'm making my colors and stuff, that this should be getting lighter, and it's getting a little, you know, slightly, it's changing the color, so this is getting a little bit more purple as it comes back here. There's also some definite shadows on the mountaintop back here, and so we're going to put a little bit of warmth here, which has a little bit of those the violets have a little bit of red, which will make it feel just a little bit warmer. And then we'll come out, you put the blue on the tops that will seem cooler, and we're trying to give that illusion of depth. We're trying to give that illusion of perspective, what's called atmospheric perspective. And again, that's what we talked about before, where we have, you know, not only do things get smaller as they go back, things get less contrast as they go back, all that sort of stuff. And they also will change, you know, the contrast goes down, the hue goes down. There's all these different changes going on as things get further and further back from us. So again, we got a little bit of these clouds casting shadows onto the hilltop. So there's a definite edge to the hilltop back there, because again, the shadows that are happening on there. And we're starting to get a nice feeling on this. It's starting to feel like a landscape. There's a couple things I think are going to help a lot. This needs to tie together. So we did, I just saw this, I'm like, wow, that didn't tie together as much as I'd hoped. So we're going to go ahead and maybe put a little bit more of a wash on the hillside, because the hillside, again, this seems like little splotches and dots everywhere. It doesn't seem to pull together. So what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and bring a wash in here, try to pull this together a little bit. Okay. So I put over this to make that one group. Now that group is now this, you know, pretty similar to these guys. So there's points at which these trees are kind of dissolving into that tree line. That doesn't bother me right now, because, so I'm also going to merge a couple places. I'm going to use this to merge these two lines so they don't feel like two stripes. So just enough to link these two together. So again, they feel like they have a relationship. So there's, you know, this stuff is, you know, sometimes when it dries, it changes a little bit. I'm sitting there going, yeah, let's, you know, it looks good. And I'll go over and go, holy smokes! Well, we got to modify that. That's not that big a deal. You're going to constantly be on the lookout as you're painting for areas that may need a little attention. And don't be afraid to say, nope, needs more attention. Don't be the person that tries to convince themselves it's all worked out when it actually isn't. So we're going to leave this alone for a little bit, and we're going to come up into the sky. So now for the sky, just this one right here seems a little too dissimilar. I'm gonna probably wet this whole area right through here. So I'm going to see if I can get all the blue green out of my brush. What's going on over here? So I'm going to try to get all the blue green out of this brush. And then I'm going to go ahead and very gently as I can, I'm going to try to wet this area. Maybe I'll just re-wet the whole sky. No, I don't want to touch that. That hill is probably wet enough that I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go over here and come around through there. Okay. So again, very gentle. I want to keep my brush almost parallel to the surface. So that way I'm not, the more it's like this, the more it will drag and the more it will disturb the paint. So we don't want to disturb the paint if we don't have to. So I'm going to go ahead and just wet most of this now. And the reason why is I want to do some, I got some splotches on the photograph. That's okay. This is watercolor. It happens. We're going to bring some paint up into here. As far as that goes. Maybe we'll bring some of the reds in there, just a scotch. So we have some little more color happening in there like that. We've also got some blue coming in here, and this blue comes down and rests on there. Like so. And we're going to bring this up a little bit into the sky. Like that. And maybe we'll just bring just a little bit more up into the sky. Whoops. Maybe a little bit too much, so we're going to take some of that out. Bring that into there. Again, like so. Maybe we're going to bring a little bit more, take some of that's really wet, so I'm going to take out some of the water using the ferrule. And we're going to see if we can, pardon me, this is really wet through here. So we're going to go ahead and take some of that out. All right, so I think that looks nice. Let's see if we can bring a little bit more into here, as far as that goes. So bring some of that in, like that, and see if we can just a little bit more like that. So I think that's looking pretty good. Shame this got in there, a little bit of that blue, so we're gonna try to modify this slightly, just soften that blue blotch right there. Bring in some paint in here, just a little bit perhaps. Like so. Not ideal, but I got to do it because I don't want that to seem, maybe this is coming across there and breaking up a little bit. That makes it more plausible. We're going to try to take some more of the blue, and we're going to try to bring some more of the blue in here in a couple places that I think will help with this cloud. And I think we need some big swipes, so So I grabbed my bigger brush. So that'll then bleed into there a little bit. That will then come over into here. And we got, let's see, this will go down here. And so go into there, and that'll go into there. And just pull this across. We're going to try to integrate a couple of these places. I think that'll help tie that together. Let's see, we're going to go ahead and try to tie this together. Alright, so we're going to continue working some blue in there in this wash. We only have a few moments really left for us to be able to do anything here. Again, because of watercolor, there's times we have to go, I didn't want it to do that, but that's what my stroke did, and I have to leave it. And so there's a lot of learning to accept what you're given when you're doing watercolor. You just have to. It's part of the nature of it. Because if you're like, there's going to be stray brush strokes. There's going to be things happening where it's not what you wanted. That's not exactly how you wanted it. But you have to go, well, but does it work? Kind of live with it. And if you can live with it, and you're like, that'll work, then you're fine. There's really a whole lot of, just letting go or whatever when you're painting in watercolor, because you just can't. There's only a certain amount of control that you have over the medium, and the rest is is left up to kind of chance or fate or what have you. But you just have to learn to go, accept what you can, control what you can, and then let the rest, let it go, let it be, let it do whatever the word you want. But you just have to learn to kind of accept some of the limitations that the medium itself gives, and that's okay. There's, this is not supposed to be oil paint. This is not, egg tempera. This is its own type of medium that has its own limitations. It has its own, setbacks. It has its own, things that it does, and that's fine, because it also has things that you can do things in watercolor and get techniques and things like that, and have stuff bleed and look ways that you can't really do in oil in a terribly effective or easy way. And there's things that you can do in oil that's hard to do in watercolor that you can't do in an effectively in an easy way. So there's, each one has its benefits. Each one has its, people could call them drawbacks. I like the term limitations, but within those limitations, man, it's fantastic what people can do with this stuff. And that's what we're trying to do. We're like, well, yeah, everything's got limitations, but what can I do with this? Yeah, it's not perfect, but man, doesn't that look cool? Isn't that fun? Wasn't that satisfying? Wasn't that, didn't that make, me happy on some level? Wasn't that a great, look at the result I'm getting? And so that's what painting's all about. It's, you're not doing this to, necessarily, you're doing it for you. And that's how you should approach it. It's not anybody else. You're doing it for yourself. And if you get something great, and if you don't get, something perfect, well, that's understandable. Everyone's been there. And the most important thing is how do you feel about the time you spent? You feel like, man, that was fun. Let's do that one again. It's almost sounds like riding a roller coaster for those people that are into that. I'm not a big roller coaster person, but my father certainly was, and he loved this stuff. Couldn't get enough of them. Me, I was like, boy, you left my stomach back on that ride, and I'd like it back. Thank you very much. But it's all, it's all, about what trying your best, I guess. And it's all about, its edges. It's about color. Right now we're dealing with unity. Never underestimate the power of unity in anything, much less in painting. And all this stuff, you know, comes together. All this stuff, you know, is connected in a certain way that makes it wonderful, that makes it extraordinary, that makes it fantastic, and makes it fun. Why not have fun? That's what this is about. Part of this is about, is having just good old-fashioned fun, you know, and enjoying yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with saying, yeah, that looked good. Let's see if I can do that again. I like where this is going. Man, that captured you know, that certain time I was in a certain place, and you know, the clouds came across, and the sun broke through, and it was just phantasmic, you know, and all that sort of stuff. Phantasmagoric or whatever. And I liked it. You know, that's what we're looking for. That's what we're trying to reach, this idea of, oh, this is a memory in time. And just like a memory in time, or just like memories, paintings aren't always perfect. And some of the best paintings are not perfect. But man, are they moving. Man, are they spectacular. Man, do they say something that makes you stop and go, wow, I understand. I've been there. I've seen that. And I saw that when I was, you know, in 13 and 19 whatever, or 20 whatever, and man, it changed my life, or it changed the way I was. It impressed me, or it left its mark, whatever you want to say. Those types of moments don't come around a lot, but when they do, they can really, really affect us, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for something that affects us. Now, I didn't want to, in this photograph, a little more contrast back here between these two edges than I have in my painting. But remember, I want less detail back here. So if I got into all this little stuff, all these little clouds, which are actually quite a bit of detail back there, this would flatten out, because this is simple, and this can't have more detail than that, because that's closer to me, and that can't have more detail than this, and that can't have more detail than this. This is the next part we're going to go to, and we're going to finish this little painting out. So again, we've got getting a little lighter, getting a little bit more violet, bigger clouds, smaller clouds, and this is going to be lighter. We're going to darken this, and then we're going to call it, a done painting. And so here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to do a little bit of, maybe not total dry brushing. Let's see if I can, we're going to do a little bit of dry brush work, because we wanted this right here to have, and this area right through here in the foreground, to have the most detail. In fact, I think we're going to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and grab, we're going to go ahead and mix up some different bits of green. So this is green. This is a Viridian, which is a blue-green. We're going to add a little bit of alizarin crimson to it. Okay. We're then going to take a little bit of this, which is sap green, and we're going to add a little bit of red to it. We're then going to take a little bit of this Viridian green, which is a blue-green, and add a little bit more blue to it. We're going to add a little bit of Payne's gray, and we're going to take that Payne's gray and we're going to add a little bit of yellow to it. Payne's gray is a dark, 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 dark blue, so we get a green. So here's how I'm going to start this out. I'm going to start off with, again, some of the areas just before it drops into light. So that's going to be where we still have quite a bit of that yellow. Remember, yellow is what we lose very quickly when we change lighting conditions, as things go back, as they go further away from us. That's what we lose the quickest. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start by maybe a little bit more of this color through there. A little bit too much water, I think. I'm going to take out some water. And I'm not doing individual grasses. Don't think that's what I'm up to over here. I'm going to go ahead and try to deal with just a little bit of more information, smaller shapes, but not individual grasses. But these are a grouping of grasses and stuff that are then coming down in here and going into shadow. And this is kind of like calligraphy. I want parts that are lighter, parts that are maybe darker. I'm going to go ahead and take out more of the water. And again, this is bring some of this into here. And again, we want to keep it a little bit more random. It's not everywhere, it's just a couple places that we're getting some of this. Okay. And then we're going to come in here with the blue. Now we're going to get, you know, before it's going to get the coolest, the more it moves away from the light. The closer it is to the light, it's going to have a little bit more warmth. So we're going to start off with sap green and a little bit of yellow. Sap green is a warmer green. In fact, I might add just a little touch of red to that sap green to warm it up a little bit more. It also loses intensity. We don't want a whole lot of intensity in here anyways, because it's going to be in shadow. So now this, I'm going to go ahead. This may look like I'm doing individual grasses, but I'm not. I'm still trying to do groupings, but the groupings are going to be smaller group, bigger grouping. Pardon me, smaller, but smaller groups, but groups still. These are not individual grasses. I'm not looking for that. That's not. This isn't that kind of detailed painting, nor do I want it to be necessarily. But we're going to come in here. That might be a little dark. Let's go ahead and lighten this up. So let's see. So whenever I make a stroke, that's actually a grouping. So again, we're not trying to do individual grasses at this point now. That actually maybe looked like a little bit of an individual grass, but try to pull that out just a little bit. So this is kind of like, again, like calligraphy. We're trying to keep the shapes random. We're trying to, enjoy the shapes too, but we want them to be, if they start to look like the same up to down, this is going to stay up a little bit higher for a little bit longer, and then it's going to, come down just a bit, and then it's going to go back up, and it's going to come down for a little bit longer, and then it's going to go up for a second or two, and then it's going to come and then up, and then maybe down. Again, we want some randomness to this. And so again, it was mostly the tops that I was looking for on a lot of this. Okay. I think I'm going to use this again. There's a couple I want just a couple where I actually am going to take a couple out like they are a little taller grasses. I think that right there was a mistake. Not both of them, just one of them. You got to be careful. You start doing individual grasses everywhere, they lose their power. So again, it's an indication. If we're not careful, it starts to look the same. You start to get sameness, and sameness again is death in terms of design, good design, and that just means again, that randomness we talked about of nature, if we don't have it, it's going to look very, very strange. Our painting will look very strange. It won't have, you know, it won't be as interesting. And people go, I don't know why, but my painting just doesn't look as interesting. And a lot of times it just has to do with that randomness, or in other words, good design. That means, how do the shapes look? And that's what we're talking about, really, essentially. At the end of the day, is how good do those shapes look? And if they don't look good, what can we do to make them look better? And so that's part of what we're trying to do. Now, again, we don't want a super amounts of detail in these shadows, but we want enough so we can tell, you know, kind of that these are grasses. And so we're going to have overlapping forms that are darker against other forms that are lighter, and things like that. And so that's what we're going to be. Now, right now, it's a little bit, you can't tell that there's a lot of overlapping. And so we're going to leave this alone for a minute. We're going to come back, and again, we're almost done with this thing. Again, we want just enough information to get the feel for doing landscape. We're going to take some of this. This is cerulean blue, a little bit of this green. While this is kind of drying down, we're going to come and re-establish some of the information in these trees. Okay, these are going to have a little bit more contrast, less contrast going back. And while that's done, you know, when I'm done doing that, we're going to come back in here with some dry brush, and I'm going to see if I can start to, again, do some groupings here. And we don't want the same amount, amount of grasses everywhere. We're going to vary some of the values, vary some of the hue meaning, blue greens versus warmer greens, lighter greens versus darker greens. And we're going to try to start to get some of that, again, some of what starts to feel random enough and overlapping shapes, lighter shapes against darker shapes, that it starts to feel like, oh yeah, that might be grasses. Again, there just has to be just enough that we go, oh yeah, okay, I think I know what that is. That's what indication is. It's just getting enough so that your brain goes, I think I know what I'm looking at. And usually we're too worried about too many details, too many things that don't matter. And instead of indication, we're like, what is that? Because it can be, the hardest thing about making things, the term that painters like to say is read, is putting in just enough information. We put too much, and it can get confusing. We put in not enough, and people are like, what is that? Well, the not enough is much harder than the too much, believe it or not, because you have to kind of learn and look and keep your eyes very soft. You're looking back and forth to see if you can, if you went too far or not far enough, or how the shapes are matching up, or how they're integrating, as people would say, versus separating, and this sort of thing becomes really important when you're painting, quote unquote, to imply. And if it's not done, well, then it's hard to see. And part of this is its rhythm, its texture, the implication of texture. In other words, overlapping, lighter stuff against darker stuff, in sort of these striations. And if they're done right, we go, oh, you know what? That kind of looks like grass. That's exactly what we're talking about. And sometimes you can switch brushes a little bit to get a little different mark. Like that little mark right there is a little different. And again, it can just help but it's a darker value against the lighter. And so again, if the mark is the right mark, if it looks kind of like, you know, these striations of stuff, then again, people start going, hey, wait, I think that's grass. And again, that's all we're looking for. We just need just enough so we go, oh yeah, you know what? I think I know what that is. That's grass. And again, that's what we're doing. We're just trying to get just enough information so that people go, yeah, I think I know what that's, I think I know what I'm looking at. And this is a great way to start getting used to dealing with landscape, because so much of landscape is implied. It's not overly defined. We're not taking, you know, like 6 weeks to do some sort of photorealistic thing. And most people in watercolor do not. And there's a certain amount of watercolor that forces you to have to work this way. It forces you to have to imply things, because you cannot detail them in a super realistic manner unless you're highly experienced with the medium. You have to just simplify. It forces you to do it. And that's not a bad thing, because in art, you have to know how to simplify in order to make it detailed in a way that is correct, in a way that actually looks right, in a way that does not look wrong. And that's a much tougher gig than how it sounds. And so this is good. So that's what I'm getting at. This forces you to become a better artist much more quickly. And that's why people learn watercolor. Too many times, you know, I don't want to do watercolor, it's so hard. And there's sort of a difficulty to watercolor, but once you get over that difficulty, once you get over yourself or whatever, it's not a difficult medium. It's just learning to deal with it as a medium. And, you know, oil has its own things that are very, very difficult. And if you don't, you know, learn how to deal with it, you're going to have a terrible painting. So now I think I've got enough in here. There's almost too much detail in these shadows. So if that ever happens, I wouldn't do that now because, oh yeah, I will. I just said, I'm not doing it. Yes, I am. This is taking a risk. I'll tell you that right now. But there's too much busyness. In other words, there's too much. You have detail that gets blown out in the shadows. And so I'm just going to get straight water. And I'm going to drag. Now, you don't want to drag this up or it'll take out too much detail. But I'm just going to drag it over there. And that's going to simplify all those. They're going to bleed a little bit into one another. And that way you go, okay, yeah. And it just pulls things together. Now, if I do this too much, it's going to just become a blob. And so there's, you know, the whole idea of how much is enough. I think that's another thing that you learn when you're doing watercolor is just over and over again. How much is enough? Was that too much? Was that too little? I think right now we're getting to that point where we do have just enough. I'm going to go ahead and use some straight water. See if I can. There's some of these edges where all the edges are the same, and I want a little bit of variation to the edge. So I'm going to wet them down a little bit and just see if I can vary the edge just a little bit in just a couple places. And maybe I'll even bring, maybe just a little bit. Okay, and blot some of this a little bit, just a scotch. Okay. So now I'm going to cut back into some of the shadow. See if I can lift just a little bit. So I'm playing edge games, as some people would call it. Playing games with the edges, and it's fun. It's a really, that's where the excitement happens, sort of, you know, where you can start to play these games with the material that you're working with, and so I think right there we've got pretty much this finished painting. So again, we've got this little watercolor now of the, you know, of the, oh, I lied. There's a couple places I'm going to come back into here. Again, usually you want more contrast where you want your focal point, which I want over here. So I'm going to glaze these down a little bit so that your eye will move over here a little bit more. So it moves over to here. The darkness moves you to here, and then you'll keep, you know, moving until you know, kind of start to go up through here and then back down. So I think I like that just a little bit better. Sometimes just a little bit of information, like you could put just maybe a little information there to separate that, maybe a little information here, separate that, maybe. So again, we've got a couple places here where, you know, just a couple things I think would really add to this. But yeah, this is a fun little not sunset, little still life that we've got again. So what I want those in the class, what I want you to do, I'm going to send you this reference, watch the video, try to execute this little watercolor. For those that are just viewing on YouTube, again, you can take this and, you know, you could try to you know, work along with me. You're certainly more than welcome. But watercolor is a really great medium. Don't be afraid of it. It's one of the best mediums out there. One of the first ones I learned on, and really one of my favorites as far as that goes. So, and you can actually really get into this where you start playing edge games. You start, you know, maybe that one needs to be a little bit, you know, what happened there, and things like that. If I wanted to give this a glow, I could come along here with a little bit more of the sort of the yellow through here, just on the edge. Try to feel like the sunlight is sort of breaking down into the shadows a little bit. That's, you know, kind of fun. So you could actually take another couple hours just playing edge games to really take this to a high finish. But I think this really reads like this landscape again, getting lighter as it goes back. The clouds pointing us in towards and helping us go deep into this. We have space because this is big, medium, small, and then we have big, medium, small, and then we have foreground versus middle ground versus background of the trees getting smaller. It all helps to make it feel like it has depth.